name is Bethany, and I'm the maker behind the Capital K Knitting podcast. Today isn't a podcast video. Today is just to talk to you about why I bought a SENTRO knitting machine and why I decided to return it. I bought it with my own money. I returned it of my own volition because I really wanted to know if it was worth the investment. And I've come up with a kind of yes and no answer to that question. Now, before we get started into what my experience was with the SENTRO knitting machine, I'm not going to be hating on people who use them. I think that if you use a knitting machine, then you're using it for what works for you. I know that there is a lot of unnecessary, conflict around knitting machines. Knitting machines have been around since the Victorian era. Also, people saying that certain kinds of crafting are better than other kinds of crafting has also been around since the Victorian era. And honestly, I think that type of thinking is outdated. So I'm not going to give any credence to that. I think it's silly. I think that sock knitting machines, even though these are a pair of hand knit socks that I made, I love them. I've also paid for someone to crank out sock tubes for me and added heels and toes on them. I think those were totally worth my investing in that saving of time for me. The gauge isn't what I want for my socks personally, but for gifts or for my kids, they have worked out really well. So just like the sock knitting machines, right? The SENTRO knitting machine has a purpose. Just because the purpose doesn't fit your lifestyle or what your needs are doesn't mean that it doesn't work for other people or that it shouldn't exist or that it's not as good as other crafting ways of being, right? Okay, so now that we've established that, let's move on to just my personal experience. I got the SENTRO knitting machine. I was really excited about it. The ADHD novelty excitement was there, and I cranked out, I think, 14 or 15 hats in 2 to 3 days. I was so excited about it. Here are the pros for me in the SENTRO knitting machine experience. Number one, I'm doing a very low buy, extremely low buy year for yarn for myself. And that's not because I don't want to buy a ton of yarns that I see online. They're beautiful. However, I've already purchased a lot of yarn that I really like and I need time to be able to use it. So I'm not telling myself I can't buy any yarn, but I have put some boundaries around how I would like to invest in my stash this year. That being said, I was able to use so many yarns from my stash. I was so excited to be able to use them. I used acrylic yarn, I used alpaca yarn, I used wool yarn, I even used a big furry kind of yarn like this. It was just all over the place. The things that were just kind of left from projects that I wasn't sure what to do with those resources anymore, it was so great to be able to use them. So the first hat that I cranked out was a gray wool hat, and I tried to tension it really pretty tightly because I know that the gauge on the SENTRO, if you're using a smaller weight of yarn, it's just gonna, you can't adjust the circumference obviously of that or add more needles to it. So it's just 48 needles and you just tension it as well as you can. Now I did the first one and it came out to be a child size hat, so I gave that to my son for his birthday. I added a little yellow pom on it so it matched the yellow mittens that I knit him for his birthday, and that was perfect. That was great. And I thought, okay, well maybe the tension that I desire only would make children's hats with this machine. Then I cranked this one out, and this can fit an adult. However, it's just one strand of worsted weight yarn. It's 100% wool, so it's very bouncy. It can fit a child, but it can also fit on my head as well. And these are all, I used them, I just cinched the top and the bottom on these. So they're very similar to just like, you just make a tube and then you cinch the top and the bottom. I am wearing my muscle burrow hat unironically today because I always wear it unironically. What I mean is that I love this hat and I'm wearing it today on purpose to show the difference between the hand knit side of it and this cinched situation. Now this is fine, and especially if you put a pom-pom on it, you can barely see the cinching anyway. It's just, it covers all of that, which is great. But this isn't necessarily the tension that I was wanting to have. It pulls those knit stitches pretty far, and to me at a certain point it doesn't even look like knit fabric anymore. Because it's 4 layers, when you pull it this way, you would think that it would be pretty windproof, but it's not at all. The wind blows through it pretty badly. So this is more a child's hat than anything, so that the stitches can stay more together, which we need more children's hats in my house all the time. That's totally fine. And then the one that I really liked the tension on was this one. This is 2 strands of 100% alpaca with a strand of lace weight wool and silk together. I think it's a 75% wool and 25% silk. Now if I stretch this one, it still kind of comes apart, but you can tell it's a lot thicker, so it's gonna be not, it doesn't need to be stretched as much to go over an adult head. Now I've worn this several days and it's very nice. It's cool to the touch because the silk in it is really nice. So the fiber that I used for it, I kind of fell out of love with it, and I'd cast it on a few times for a couple of different projects and I was just kind of over it. So it was really nice to be able to crank out a hat that I would like the experience of making and kind of fall back in love with the fiber itself. The wind still goes through this one, which is unfortunate because I liked the gauge on this one the best out of all of them. Well, that's not true. There was one more that I liked a little bit better. This is the best one that I kept, really, other than my son's hat. I made another one for my niece, and it was a similar gauge where it was 2 strands of baby llama with actually I think it was 3 strands of baby llama together. So it was even chunkier than this. But the problem that I had with that is once I got to that dense of a gauge, it was clicking, it wasn't turning, and in the instructions it says to try not to force it to do anything. So if it's stuck, then you're kind of done. And so I was really carefully, really slowly pulling that yarn through the machine so that I didn't damage the machine. However, that rate of crafting, number one, it was horrible for my hands and my shoulder. I woke up sore the next day. And number two, it's just against the purpose of that machine. The whole purpose of the machine is to be able to crank it this way and have it go smoothly through. And so I was working against how that machine worked. So I really liked that one the best. And after I got that hat finished, I realized that that knitting machine wasn't for me, because the gauge at which I had to pull yarn through it is the gauge at which the machine started to rebel and say, no, that's not how I work. However, I was able to get all of this, all these acrylic yarn hats together. This part is actually wool, which is fun. All these acrylic hats done. All of these. Now this rhino hat, my son has been asking for maybe 6 months, and I finally was able to get it through. And this is why it took so long. Making a muscle burrow out of acrylic yarn is not something that I want to do. Not because I don't want to do it for my son, not because it would feel awful or whatever. I've just fallen in love with certain fibers, and those fibers aren't necessarily things that I'm ready to give to my children. I have 4 children, and they are of an age where they're just learning how to be careful with certain items of clothing that I give them. Now, I've been able to let go of a lot of things around socks, around mittens, things like that. Those are things that can just come in and out of our lives. That's fine. But when it comes to something that a muscle burrow, it takes me weeks to do, and it just doesn't even. It might take me a week to do a worsted weight one, but with my life and my schedule, that's how long it takes me. So to take that long to make an unnecessary hat for my son, it just was on the back burner all the time. And so I was able to get that complete. This one down here is a unicorn hat for my daughter. I made the horns. Of course, I hand knit those, but this was also just a cranked out hat. She's had this yarn, he's had this yarn picked out for months and months. And so those are finally all complete, and that's great. My youngest daughter also wants me to make a unicorn horn for this hat. And on the inside, I've got some faux fur yarn in there. She really likes that. And this one is just a conglomeration of different yarns, different fingering weight wool yarns, and yeah, I have really enjoyed just putting all of these together and having them all complete. It's really lovely to have things that I wasn't looking forward to working with out of my stash. And I must say, particularly this sparkly yarn, it is, I mean, look at it. What kid wouldn't love this yarn, right? This is 3 strands of this sparkly yarn held together, and working with it, even on the machine, my reaction to the texture was just, I did not like it. And so being able to have that done so that my kids can really enjoy it, and I don't have to like make it a labor of sacrifice for that, was really great. And these 2 are exactly the same. These are the same construction, same wool base and everything. I really like this color. It's just the same thing. It's just going to have to work for a kid's hat for not to be stretched out to Kingdom Come. Now this one was a yarn I wasn't looking forward to dealing with, not because I don't like how it feels. I do like how it feels, but obviously this fabric, you can't even see where these stitches are. And that's actually the fun part of this fabric. I can stick my thumb through the top of this hat, right? But you can't really tell with this. It's a fun hat, right? And this is actually the reverse stockinette side, because the stockinette side you could actually see the stitches a lot. Not the stitches, maybe the pattern more clearly. So what I'm going to do, since this doesn't really have any bounciness to it, the elasticity is pretty minimal. Even with the elasticity that's coming from it is just from the stitches, not from the yarn itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread some elastic through the bottom of this, maybe a couple of pieces, so that it'll come back in. And I'm going to give this to one of my nephews because he really likes this furry texture. And I'd been planning on making something like this for him for a while. But of course, I just didn't want to have to deal with if I dropped a stitch or something and just having to sort all that out. It's impossible. Like, you can't even see these stitches. So that's done as well. And I made a couple that were all marled. So there, a lot of these are yarns that are held together because of what I was experiencing with the gauge. This one is a worsted weight held with a fingering weight yarn. And then once I got to here, yeah, I just switched the worsted weight from a pink to a white because I ran out of the pink. But I really enjoy this. I think this looks really cute. It's still a similar situation to the plain worsted weight hats, it's not much different since there's just a fingering weight held with it, but it is a little bit chunkier there. My problem with the Centro at this point was that if I dropped a stitch on the machine, which did happen several times, and you can see it on here, this stitch obviously is a mess, and then there are some over here that are kind of a mess, all in this area. I had to go in with a crochet hook and fix it while it was still on the machine, and it's just hard to even that out. I haven't blocked any of these. I don't think I will. I'll probably wash them at some point when my children have, you know, accidentally dropped them in the mud or something, but I think I'm going to just let that go. I'm not going to try to block that out. But that was another moment with the machine that I thought, this is just hard for me to get what I'm wanting out of it. And this was a self-striping yarn, so it's kind of fun. You can see the variation even in the marl there. This one is 4 different strands of fingering weight yarn and a Surrey alpaca held in there, and you can see the Surrey alpaca runs out right about there. And these are yarns I was not excited about working with anymore. I had worked with them for other projects and they were just leftovers that I was trying to figure out where they should go, what I should do with them. And I made 2 actually. I made one I made this one, and then I made one almost exactly like this, but without the Surrey alpaca. And I ended up giving the other one to our neighbor because she takes her dog on these long walks, and she had this little like earmuff thing that she wears, and maybe that is, you know, I'm sure it works for her, but I thought, you know, I bet she would like a wool hat. And with this one, with the fingering weight yarns, I think that's the best chance that we would have that the wind wouldn't blow through it as much. And I got a report back from her, and she said she loves it, and it's very warm, and it stays on her head really well, which is nice to hear. The last project I did was actually a headband. So I did a similar tension as with my son's hat that came out as a child's hat. It cannot fit on an adult head. But this one is just a tube, right, like this. And then you can wear this little ruched part in the front or on the side, whatever works for you. But I didn't have enough black yarn to do a whole nother hat. And I thought, I probably don't even want to do a whole nother hat because I can't seem to get this single strand tension the way that I want it to be. So I just did as much black yarn as I could on it. I cinched these sides up, I sewed them together, and then I wrapped that end around the front. It fits my head pretty snugly, so that means that I can share it with my children if they want to also partake of this headband. Here's why I decided the Centro knitting machine isn't for me. Number one, I'm not going to markets. I'm not selling my hand knit items. So I don't need to do a time versus profit versus cost analysis on my crafting time. That's not something that I have to do. However, if that's something that you do have to do, of course, this would make sense for you to own. Also, I just could not get the gauge that I was wanting with that. Even when I got to the one that I liked the best, I still would have liked it if it was a denser fabric there. And you can tell with the muscle burrow that I've knit myself, this is a fingering weight muscle burrow, and I knit this up on a 2.75 millimeter needle. There's no way you can achieve that on a Centro knitting machine. It's just not possible. The third reason that I really appreciated being able to use a Centro knitting machine is my kids were able to be involved. I've given my kids a few knitting lessons and they really want to be able to do it themselves, but they're just not in a place where they can do that unsupervised. I would love for them to be in that place. We're going to keep working on it, but I don't want to be frustrated with them for lacking a skill that I didn't even have at their age. So it was really fun to be able to use the Centro Knitting Machine with them and let them crank out most of their own hats. I did the finishing work for it, and I did the horns and everything that they wanted for their hats, but when it came to the actual cranking, I had them do that part because I wanted them to realize that even with a machine, it takes time and effort and work to be able to get something that you're trying to make. So they've had these visions of these hats for months now, but it still took work. It still took breaks. It still took trying to work on not complaining for something that you're working for. And it was a real great experience for us to be able to work through that together, and for me to know that if they gave up on it, it's okay. They can come back the next day and try again, which they didn't. They both got them done in the same day, but I was not sure at one point if we would have to stop for the day. And here's what I hope you take away from this video. This is just information for you. Just like the podcast that I put forward, just like any other tutorial video that I've done, the reason I make the video isn't to say no one should get a Centro knitting machine. That's not what I'm trying to say. For me, it's not the right choice for me to hold on to something like that. It's not going to serve my life any more than a couple of days. However, this information might help you in making your determination as you look at the variables of your life and what you're working with and what you want in your gauge and what you want with your crafting. So I hope this helps you today. I hope you have a great week and happy knitting.